Hello, everyone. Sorry, I've never used one of these before, so it's very important. So, thanks to everyone for coming today. This is our first event of 2017, so we're a bit slow off the blocks, I'm afraid, but I'm sure the wait will be more than worth it. So, as you probably noticed, we're back at Codebase. So big thanks to Ollie and the crew for welcoming us back. Thanks also to Lloyd's for sponsoring the event tonight. And tonight in the house, we've also got Product Forge. Sorry, I've forgotten your name. What's your name? Your name? Paul. Sorry, Paul. We've got Paul from Product Forge, who's going to be live streaming the event tonight. I've tried to get around most of you to ask if anyone's got any objections to the live streaming, because this will be an interactive session, and Paul might come around the tables a little bit. There'll be no close-ups, just enough to get a little bit of chat. So please do let me know, or let him know if you're not comfortable with that. That's fine. And finally, to our glorious speakers here, Claire and Hilary. So they volunteered completely without coercion to come and talk today, which is brilliant. It's not all going to be them, though. You're going to be doing a bit of the hard work. I believe there's some interactive stuff to be going on. So, yeah. But before I pass you over to them, I believe that Kevin wants to say a few words. Over to you, Kevin.
Evening all. Does it work? Can you hear me? My name's Kevin White. I'm, along with a couple of other colleagues, are organising Accessibility Scotland, which is a conference we ran for the first time last year, relatively successfully, and somebody suggested we should do it again. So we panicked and got it sorted out for doing it again. It's on the 22nd of September, which is quite soon. There is a website, accessibility.scot, so you can get tickets there. We've got 5 speakers for the day, and we're having an open session. So the idea is to actually see what people want to talk about and get people self-organising rather than just being sitting there getting talked at for 8 hours or whatever. It's in Edinburgh, and it's all available for the cheap price of £50. So please do consider coming along. If you can't, see if any of your colleagues are interested in coming along. It'd be great to see folks there. Okay. And if anybody's got any questions about it, just give me a shout later. That's fine. So I'm going to pass you over to Hilary.
No, thank you. Hello, right, can you hear me okay? Because I really dislike talking into mics and have a habit of bashing them off my chin eventually, so hopefully I'll not get too excited. But thank you so much for coming to hear us tonight. Claire and I have done this talk once before, so if you went to UX Scotland and you heard us there, then feel free to leave. We won't judge you. But if you did go and hear Spencer, who was up against us in the same slot on the last day, hang about, it's going to be good. Talking forms as a concept, as a presentation for me, started about 5 or 6 years ago. I went to a training course in London that was organised by Caroline Jarrod, who is, if you know her, she's a source of information about forms design and all things related to forms. And I had to get the sleeper train down because I worked for government and they're a bit tight and they don't pay for planes. So I don't really remember lots and lots, being at 5 or 6 years ago now, but what I do remember was a technique that she taught us about how you should test forms, and a really cheap and dirty way of testing whether it was a digital form or a paper-based form, was to grab a colleague and talk it through like it was a conversation. And that's because things that we read are taken in differently from things that we hear. And if the form was badly designed, she suggested it might come over as being a wee bit arrogant or a bit abrupt or a bit rough. And all of those things would come out if you try to have a conversation. So we did. We went back up to sunny Scotland, and that's what the team that I worked for at the time started doing through all of our forms. We spoke them through, and we used it in the context of the Student Loans Company, which is who I worked for then, but also we started widening the scope of it. So, completely separately, hands up if you have voice user interface devices in your home. Hey, a few little people. So I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. It's all over my house. It's in my phone, it's in my computer, it's in my TV, it's in the consoles that control a lot of our media, and because I've got one of these home assistants, I can also turn on the lights, turn off the lights, do a bit of home security stuff, and control the heating. And I'm completely buying into this. It's pretty much throughout most of what I do now, and it's kind of bonkers. But smartphones certainly have been widely accepted to have changed the way that we all work and the way that we use the internet and how we access it. And I started looking into this. This is the smartphone sales in the last 10 years. It's one of the beautiful hockey stick kind of curve, the stuff that you want to really see. If you're a product manager, you'd be going, excellent, that's fantastic. And the wee yellow arrow down the bottom is roughly when we started talking about mobile first and why we should have to design for mobiles well before really everyone had a smartphone. And that was kind of like, okay, that's quite cool. But all of the smartphones that we have now that we carry around in our pockets are capable of doing voice interface or voice recognition, and you could technically talk to most of the phones to control them. But we don't tend to do that. It's not really been widely adopted yet. And what's making me really, really nervous is if we started talking about mobile first roughly in kind of 2009, just before 2010, we all had an opportunity to start implementing that into our work. And we had a few years to do it before it really became critical. However, if there's a sudden spike in the way that people use their phones particularly to be a bit more voice interactive and capable, because maybe they've got an Alexa or they've got an Amazon Echo in the house and they're starting to think that this is really, really handy, we're not really in the same place that we're going to take advantage of that kind of curve. We don't have the same time because you're suddenly just going to see this crazy spike. And last year there was only about 5 million Alexa-type devices sold in the UK, which is not a lot. It would be a little dot on that graph. So we're well behind the curve if everyone decided to really start using voice interface design, which is the reason for today's talk. So I don't know about you, but hands up if you've seen the film Her. Hey, that's more folk than actually have voice recognition devices. Excellent. People want their technology to be a bit more human. There's a line, right, and it's been kind of widely documented that they don't really want it too human because that becomes creepy. But there's a sweet spot. And for those that haven't seen it, Her is a romantic kind of comedy about a guy having it's a love story about a chap and his phone and his operating system. And it's really not that far-fetched in some respects. We could do it. So, in some ways, we want our technology to be able to remember a conversation that we've had with it. We would like it to know what our preferences are, but the technology is not really there yet. It tends to be command and obey. It tends to be kind of very statement-orientated. What time is it? I was amazed the other day when I realised that my Alexa could actually take 2 timers, not just one, and she remembers the fact that I'd set one for 20 minutes, one for 10 minutes, and that was like glorious. But that seems to be the extent of most of our kind of technology so far, and it won't take long for it to be better, but are we ready for it? So, conversations have 2 parts. Somebody has to speak and someone else has to listen. And the speaking part of the technology has been it's been established in assistive technology for a long time now. So in terms of screen reader technology, at first it was so expensive that not many people used it, and over the years it's got cheaper, it's got less. If you have the time, my favourite TED Talk ever is by a chap called Ron McCallum, who was a blind practitioner of law in Australia, but he worked with the guys that developed JAWS to make it more universal, and he has some brilliant observations in there about how blind people try to read porn and stuff like that. And it's things that you wouldn't have ever appreciated, so totally recommend that. And on the other side, there's the listening side. So you can't have a conversation if there's just one person talking. It's too much like this and not enough of you guys interacting. And that's not technology that's really been as mature for as long. But in recent years, it's came on leaps and bounds. But we still don't use it. So HTML5 has had the speech API inbuilt into Chrome now for at least 4 years, if not much longer, since version 35, whenever that was. And again, I know 1 or 2 people that will speak to their phone and get it to do a Google search for them, but that's probably about it. So there's a really great Scottish phrase called "old age doesn't come by itself." My granny loves it, my mum and dad still say it. But the reality is, about 20% of the UK population, I think it's 18 specifically, have a disability or a long-term condition. However, that's not everyone. That starts When you're a child, it's about 6% of the population. As you get older to working age, it's about 16%. And by the time you're in pensionable age, it's nearly half of the population. So over time, people's abilities change. So your eyesight changes. I'm going to try and remember my stats because I can't read everything off the screen. But your eyesight deteriorates between the ages of 40 and 65. People start becoming long-sightedness, and you can see it in restaurants when people are holding the menu further and further away from themselves. Colours become harder to distinguish. Blue particularly becomes difficult for people, so my father doesn't drive at night for that reason now. Over 65s account for 25% of the hearing impaired audience. Audience is the wrong word, but the hearing impaired in the UK. But one that I found particularly troubling was that there's research proves that the elderly stop trusting their memory long before it actually starts to fail them. And collectively, all of these things together can make people really lose confidence and possibly withdraw a bit from society and become more isolated. So collectively, is there things that we could do to help that and help mitigate that? In contrast, before I go, it has been proven in usability studies run by Jakob Nielsen that the older generation, the elderly, have more patience, therefore are better when it comes to undertaking certain tasks online. And other statistics have proven that they're generally more contented with life and they're happier when surveyed at national levels. So there's a bit of a juxtaposition there, right? But mental models. This is a subtle one, but if you think back to your family, and I think they're going for the under 35s because apparently the under 35s are where millennials technically start. I'm not entirely sure that's true, given I'm only, 35 and a half? Woohoo. But if you've grown up all your days with CD players and video players, you know what a pause button looks like. You know what those icons mean in any context. You just know what an arrow forward and back, 2 arrows together means, all that kind of stuff. However, if you have the conversation with a much more elderly family member, they'll say, "Oh, what are you talking about, the 2-line button," when you're trying to phone them and explain to them how to pause something on TV. Equally, my mum is terrible for saying, "I'll speak to you later," on the mobile phone, and she has to make a place for the thing. So it's not just a case of, "I'll just speak to you later on the phone." It's granted, most people it's mobile these days. Similarly, if you're going to do a search and I'll say to a family member, I'll see what I can find. But my mum will say, "I'll look that up on the internet," because it's a place, because it's not always been there in their life. They have to contextualize it. They have to say, it's almost like going to the library. It's that kind of space. So in about 2013, there was a number of surveys run, commissioned by government, but run by different organisations. This one was the Oxford University. And when they tried to dig deep on the reasons that people didn't go online, overwhelmingly, it was age-related. People of that kind of older bracket, 65 and over, identified it as age as being the primary reason why they weren't, "It's not for me." Similarly, that age group are proven to have statistically lower digital skills and capabilities. So that's 97% of the over 65s compared to 18% get my stats all the wrong way around. 97% of people aged 16 to 24 have went on the internet over a phone, where it was less than 20% of the over 65s. And it's such a shame, because the over 65s especially could really benefit from all the advantages that going online could offer. It could help them be more sociable. It could help them do a bit of online shopping when the weather is terrible and have it delivered, and all the inconveniences that they may have to struggle through, possibly don't drive anymore, all of these kind of things. So does anyone recognise the digital inclusion scale? This is if you ever have to go through government assessments because you work for government, and I've done this now for a few years, and we've talked about this at length. This is based on BBC surveys done in 2013. They scoped out the UK population. So 79% of the population lie within categories 7 to 9. So that's basic digital skills right up to expert. I actually saw the very first version of this diagram, and it had a category 10, which was cyborg, but they decided to take it away for some reason. And 14% of the population are in categories 1 to 4. So that's from never have, never will, up to reluctantly online. And I found it really, really interesting to plot my family on this, right? Because the majority of my relatives, not so much my husband's relatives, are in the red zone. And there's a complete irony to that, right? But it's critical for a government, whether it's central government or Scottish government, that want to move to a digital, by default, kind of service in life, that they have to help people get confident in this kind of space. So the idea is, we do a thing called assisted digital when we're designing government services, and we move people up a step. That's the ambition, certainly, so that if you were to, hopefully, by using our assisted digital service, we have done it with you, not for you, and we've helped you get a little bit more confident so that when you go to do your next government service, maybe you're starting from a 4 and not a 3, that kind of space. And it's got the best of intentions. So, again, part of the same series of surveys, this one's by age.org. Why do people not go online? There's a number of reasons that really, really resonate with me and my family, and I can hear it from certain family members about fear and not trusting it, and all these people that are out to get your data and all the kind of scaremongering that goes with that. So I've been reading about this for a few years now, and I've been trying to think about ways that I can help my family that are older and maybe are a bit sickly, because quite a few of them are, stay as independent as possible and stay in their own home as long as possible. And there's been some really interesting adoptions. Did you know that America certainly got the Alexa, the Amazon Echo, a year before the UK and Germany did? So there's about a year's worth of data out there on those devices, which is why I end up talking about Alexa more often. I'm not saying it's the better technology, it's probably Google Home, but they've got about a year and a half on them, so there's a lot more research being published. And one example was an article. It was an unexpected use of the Amazon Echoes. And this was about a man who now lived in a care home, but his family had bought him an Alexa. And it's really lovely, and I'll happily share the link to the entire article for you. But it has made a tangible difference to this man. And he says, if only for the fact that his Alexa can read books to him, which is something he can no longer do because his eyesight has failed so badly, that's enough. But it can do so much more for him. And it was really touching. It was one of those moments. So, that Christmas, we got most of our family, the ones in the red zone, all got a Christmas gift of an Amazon Echo, be it the little one or the big one, depending on how hard their hearing was. And there was a gentleman who's a never have, never will, and there was online but no longer, which is my parents, and a willing but unable. And the willing but unable person, when I've tried to explain what I do for a living, I'm like, well, I'm trying to make the internet a bit easier to use. And she's like, oh, just get on with it then. There's definitely a resistance there, but not as bad as Mr. Have, never will. He sees the technology that we use on a day-to-day basis as being scary and threatening and all those kind of words that were on the last screen. He is genuinely scared. And it's because he just doesn't understand it, and he thinks there's more potential for danger than there is potential to help him. And when we got them all, we had to go and set it up and show them how to use it, and in some cases we had to actually pay for the internet to be piped into their house because they never had. But the reason for this particularly was Mr. Never Have, Never Will got diagnosed with a memory condition last year. And we knew that if we could get this as something he used while he was still able to take on new things and retain them, it was going to really help. And it did. So he loved it because he could listen to music on demand. He's a big Frank Sinatra fan, and his neighbours must hate him because he listens to it at full volume. But that was what he saw as being really useful for. But once we had it in his home, we wired it up to a Google Calendar, and we use it to remind him to stay in or to go out because he's got a doctor's appointment. And we've kind of tried to secretly get him to use the internet without realising it. And he's totally bought into it at all. So he still doesn't think he uses the internet at all, but he listens to the radio, he gets his news updates from it, and he's getting to a place where he's really forgetful. So he doesn't feel embarrassed about asking Alexa, what time is it and what day is it? Whereas he got super apologetic with us. He got to a place where he was actually apologising before he asked the question because he assumed that he'd already asked it, even though he may not have. And that was just the nature of his health condition. And it's back to that point I mentioned earlier, that he started to doubt his own memory long before it actually went. So for him, it's been a proper game changer. And we've managed to get it in his life in a time when he can still learn how to use something new before that part of his memory's kind of gone. I forgot to say, I did say he plays everything full volume. So it's not perfect, right? Because he's playing tunes full volume and then it can't hear him telling it to switch off. And that's kind of partly because he doesn't wear hearing aids, because he thinks hearing aids age him. But like I say, he must have the most patient neighbours in the world. So things don't always work out perfectly. Again, has anyone heard of the story about the girl who ordered cookies and doll houses through the Alexa? So this is a lesson for you. If you've got one of these devices, absolutely set up your PIN, right? People don't do it, and that's how these accidents happen. So you can see the conversation. She's probably said something like, Alexa, will you play with me? And it'll end up being, yeah, what do you want to play? Doll's houses. Doll's houses. And it gets straight into your shopping cart. And, you know, Alexa, I'm hungry. I want a cookie. Cookies, box of cookies come. So that was, you know, a great kind of comedy story. But it got worse. When the local news started to cover it, it had a ripple effect. So they picked up on it, started broadcasting it, and all over that state, Alexas were ordering cookies and dog houses because it was just this massive. So rather than saying, please, please lock down your devices with a PIN, they just made the whole thing a bit worse. Does this bear any kind of... if you've got a Scottish accent, you'll know what this means. But this is a sketch from two guys who are stuck in a lift, and they're trying to get to the 11th floor. Or is it 11 or 7? 11. And the lift doesn't recognise their accents. And it builds up for a good 15, 20 minutes. And I actually used this at work to demonstrate the point and got really in trouble because I played it far too loud in the boardroom and the whole company heard. So, but yeah, we know what it's like to have devices that don't understand our accents. And that's getting considerably better with particularly the Google Speech API. But when we're building web-based technologies, when we're building apps or we're building websites, there's certain things that we try to do to mitigate defects happening before they happen. We build prototypes and then we test them with people as early as possible. So this kind of got me thinking about, well, if we were going to try and build a prototype for a speech API or a voice interactive system, then what would we do? How would we do it? I'm trying to think of something that equally as lo-fi as a pen and paper prototype. So if you were starting a new project, you were going into an organisation and they'd asked you to help build their Alexa skill or otherwise, what would you do? You'd start with any research they've got. And if they're a big enough organisation, they might have an IVR system so that you could go and you could understand what language has been understood, because there's lots of different ways of saying the same thing. And I'm not saying for a second that you lift and shift the IVR, because IVRs have been designed generally to be binary, you know, kind of ones and twos and yes and no's, or press the number on the keypad. But you will get a sense of the utterances that make sense to those customers, because there's going to have been some research done around the voice recognition system for the phone lines. Instant voice recognition, sorry. So anytime you've phoned, I think cinema's a kind of comedy example, and try to book a ticket over the thing and it says now press 3 for this and 4 for that, or speaking into it. So certainly my bank's got much better at letting me, yeah. Sorry, apologies. Yeah, I'm nervous. I'm up the front, not expecting questions. So there is a way of doing it, and we've proven it, and we've talked about it. And the day we were talking at UX Scotland, somebody else was giving the same talk. So it's definitely a theme, right? The Wizard of Oz testing method. I'll tell you, my first time I did it, it was on the very, very first Agile project I was attached to, and I was a UI designer, and I was really excited to be doing everything Agile. And our first sprint, we built the front end. So we were high-fiving each other in the background because we had built basically the entire flow in the first 2 weeks. How amazing were we? But we couldn't demo it because we hadn't built any of the functionality in it. So when the product owner rocked up, because she wasn't the kind of product owner that sat with us all the time, we were like, what are we going to do? So one of the developers sat up the back of the room and pretended to be the database. So he typed in all the responses, and he, to all intents and purposes, was the system. And we nearly got away with it, but he couldn't spell. So they started raising defects off the back of it, and we're kind of like, no, it's fine. So we kind of came clean. But that's Wizard of Oz. Ultimately, it's someone manually doing the thing that the system will eventually automate or do. And you don't have to invest in a lot of tech or code or testing in the system test sense to be able to get something out the door to get in front of people. And this is actually the way that Amazon tested the Echo. They had participants come into one room and sit basically in front of a computer that had no screen and talk, and there was someone in the other room that was pretending to be the computer, and they had the internet in front of them, so they were able to answer, I think it was up to 50 questions. And from that, they got the data about the kind of Q&A process, but also the idea of customer satisfaction, and nobody had written a line of code. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Claire.
So, to kind of follow on from what Hilary was saying, is that we're going to do a bit of designing for voice interfaces ourselves. So rather than the Alexa or Amazon Home, we have Lou, who is going to be our device. So if I can get you all to get into groups of 3s to start off with, and then we'll work ourselves out from there. If you're not in a group of 3, let me know. Yes. Actually, that'll cut out a bit of time, won't it? Is everyone in a group of 3? Is there MD that's not in a group of 3? So we've all got groups of 3. Excellent, that's worked out well. So, within your group of 3, you're going to have one person who's going to be Lou. So, aside from you, who's going to be Lou? One person is going to be the device. In each group. Have you all worked that one out? Okay. One person is going to be the customer or the owner of the device that's going to be talking with the device. And one person is going to be the researcher who is sitting watching the conversation to work out how to design it better. So work out the new groups and work out who's going to be which role. We're cutting out the paper, scissors, stones. Okay, we all worked out who's who. So we have various bits to help us throughout this. So as Hilary was talking about, we've got a particular theme for some of the tasks that we're going to ask Lou to perform, or not to perform, but to interact with us. So if one person for your group wants to come up and get a task. So if you open up your envelopes, you'll have a task in there, so you can have a discussion about your task. Are there any questions about the tasks at all? Okay, so everyone's clear on their tasks? So I'm not sure if you know it, but the face gives away quite a lot of visual clues. With the Wizard of Oz, you have a curtain between you. We don't have the luxury of a curtain. So we're going to do the next best thing. So the researcher is going to sit and look at the customer and Lou. Lou and the customer are going to go back to back, so you can't give any facial signals. What we're going to do is we're going to try this out unscripted. Remember what Hilary was saying earlier on about personality. So in terms of Lou, think about who you are. Are you going to be robotic? Are you going to be more personable? Are you going to be vague? Are you going to be direct? So there's all sorts of ways that you could attack this, basically. So we're going to try it unscripted. For the researchers, note as much of the customer the language that's being used. It could be that people are talking over each other because they're not getting that visual awareness of when somebody's about to start and stop. It could be that there's just repetition happening, a lot of potential errors. So note down anything that could be used as a way to improve the interaction that happens. Okay. Have you got some post-it notes?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay. So, we'll give you, I can't remember how long it is now. We'll give you 2 minutes from here for your task. Okay? Off you go.
I might. No, you haven't ordered yet. But you ate 3 hours ago. Oh my. Okay, what would you like to eat, Mike? Which menu are you talking about? Unfortunately, that is the menu that our providers have for you, Mike. I'm so sorry. Chicken What time would you like that to arrive?
One roast chicken and lemon turtle.
Oh, of course, you're getting old, you old bag. May I remind you that your daughter will be at 7 o'clock. is it you want to for yourself, Mike? And a roast chicken and herb lemon stuffing for you, Mike. In the past, Mike, you've ordered that gluten-free. Is that something you'd like us to do for you again?
No, it's okay. Well, now I like it.
And also, you normally order a bottle of whiskey every day. Would you like me to order that? Okay. Okay. What about the cocaine? It's Saturday night.
Okay,
And what time would you like to order?
how did everyone get on?
6 p.m.
For the next bit, what we're going to do is, so basically what you've just done is you've done that in unscripted. Now we're going to have a little bit of a look at what the flow actually was. So you've got paper and post-it notes, so we're going to take some time to have a think about the flow that you went through. What were the language barriers? So not just the happy path when mistakes happened, how did you recover from them? Is there anything for you to recover from them? So what was the general path as you went through? Think about Lou's personality as well. Did it work okay? Is there things that you would change about the personality in order to make the experience a lot more pleasant, a lot easier and smooth to go through? So we can take some time to have a look at that. I've got a few other notes and things we can look at that point, which is what were the system states, what happens if the input was unexpected, and how do you avoid dialogue repetition. So draw out your journey flows of the task that you've just been through and work out where you kind of deviate if there's potentially some errors in there.
So is that draw out what we did and draw out what we could do now?
It's a combination of both, so what you've done but also what the researcher has found as they were listening to the conversation, what the researcher would put in order to make that better.
I should probably prompt you to say, should I be going to
it's all right being very specifics to be achieved.
straight away. Yeah, it's one of those the system probably should just recognize these areas that you wanted to the system should ask you like just your home base or anywhere else. Would you like to it can be
enormous advantage of being able to
do what you asked it to, and that's something else. What do you think about the confirmations? Would you like to set the system to say, yeah, because you're not quite there, and you can't rely on the technology. Transition is the system telling you what you actually say. The double confirmation is
The problem I've got with that,
so maybe the system will ask you, you don't want to be told every time. I mean, I guess this is the
So we've got another 2 minutes for this part. No, 2 minutes. Hurry, hurry. Yay.
Because I can see
Okay. We're going to move on to the next part now. So hopefully you've got a bit of a workflow. It doesn't matter if you've not completed the whole thing. I know that Kevin's desperate to complete his. What we're going to do is have a look at the flow that you've made. So you've just been discussing how to improve things in terms of for the customer, or how to interact with Lou. So researcher, take as much notes about the language as you can. I've got some pointers for the researcher here. So, was it a successful task completion? Oh, I've put it successful task completion. Was it efficient? Were there miscues? Were there clashes when people were trying to speak? How did you recover from errors? And were there confirmations required as well? So these are kind of things that you can start to pick up on. So once you start to hone the conversation a bit more, then you start to pick up on the more in-depth things as you go along. What we're going to do to make it a bit more interesting is if everybody could stand up. Sorry, if I make the customers stand up first of all. So customers of each group stand up. And what you're going to do is you're going to move to a different team. When we were in the room before, it was teams on the right, so just make sure you're not in the same team again. Just to make it a bit more interesting. Now remember that this new customer might not be aware of your task, so make sure that they read the task. They're going to bring their knowledge of what they've just done within their own teams and bring it to your team. Make sure that they read the task that you have. Yeah, you can do a high level look at the workflow. So the
I'm the researcher. I need to see the questions that you want us to ask. You flash the slide by.
bring it back. So, in terms of the journey that you have, the Lou will be able to follow that journey. The customer won't be aware of that journey, but if you think about it, the customer is never going to be aware of what you would potentially be the prescribed journey. So the customer's always going to bring something new to it. So in terms of Blue, you've got that journey to see whether or not you can follow it and just see how it works with the new customer. Okay? You ready to go? And we've got 2 minutes for this.
Have I ordered dinner could I order do you have anything
Make sure you're still sitting back to back, folks.
Could I order for tonight the roast chicken breast with stuffing, please? Yes, please. That is. Can I have it at my usual time, please? Yes. 6 p.m. That's correct. Thank you. Have I ordered dinner for tomorrow? Can I have chicken breast and white wine and mushroom sauce, please? Yes, the usual time. I've just remembered your predecessor reminded me very very helpfully, and I've only just remembered now that my daughter's actually coming to dinner tomorrow.
Okay, folks, that's your 2 minutes.
I'm quite old, so my daughter's also quite old.
So we can finish up that conversation now.
Full body. Yeah, I'm an old geezer. My daughter.
Right, so within your groups of 3,
She's 53.
you'll have new learnings.
She will probably want the adult one.
So if the customer can stand up,
I'll have the
customer to stand up again
intriguing
and move to a
name
different group.
from sweet and sour chicken.
This is your
Actually, she's
rinse
not coming until 7 o'clock. I ordered
and repeat.
that dish for 7.
So we'll have another 2 minutes. Remember to allow your customer to get familiar with your task.
Yes, please. I'd like to eat together with her. I didn't realise we were doing that. I thought we were just doing it once. We're going all the way on.
Okay, has everyone got a new team?
All right. Okay. Cheers. Nice to meet you.
There must be another customer somewhere. Okay, we've got another 2 minutes.
Hi Lou, it's Abby. Oh good, thank you for asking. And at first Lou was actually asking how I am. Lou, do you know that I have something ordered I think on Sunday, next week. It's Sunday, next Sunday. When is it? What am I ordering now? It's chicken, sorry? Is that what I usually get? Is that you want to have a is there anything else? Any other type of chicken?
Tomorrow we've heard.
Okay, I'll order 2. Instead, sorry, not one, I just want those last one. Yes, please. Just to make sure I'm there when you remember that it's coming.
Have I taken it already?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I better take it.
I think that's an opportunity for you. If you actually, let's say they've got you just actually know time.
And then you're like,
What you want to mimic is actual conversation.
they're like, so they take
Then they say,
If it goes too natural,
remind me.
it's too human. Then you want a bit of
What time of day?
computer feel.
So I'll set my reminder. I suppose I was coming from the point of view. It's okay, I'll try and set my reminder.
I think it's disastrous to use people who know about interfaces to do a test of a user interface.
Well, that's what you said.
Yes, that was me.
Because you're right. It's probably all fine and done.
Okay. So you'll either be sad or pleased to hear that that's the last round. So that's a little bit of an insight into how to do the Wizard of Oz methodology. Is everyone finished up then? So that's a little bit of an introduction into the Wizard of Oz methodology. We don't have a huge amount of time this evening, which is why it's pretty much cut short on most occasions. You would have a lot more time to analyse the feedback in between. You would have more time to look at the flow of the journey, how to cope with errors when they come up. What you will have found also is that during the first round, you are aware of the errors that happen between the initial interview. Then as you move on, it'll introduce a different array of errors or a different way of somebody talking to a device. So, for example, it might become accustomed to one person, but then once you try and work out how you then deal with that and, with multiple people and multiple different ways of answering things, that's kind of when you have to start looking into these things a lot more. So, yeah, just as a general thing, would you change anything? How would you deal with the feedback that you've got coming in? As I say, we've done a very rough analysis, very quick analysis, and that's pretty much it in terms of the methodology. But so it's an introduction to you, and you can start using that if you fancy giving it a try, or even do a workshop with it. It's quite interesting as a way to get people working together well as well. I'm going to hand over to Hilary.
So sometimes we work in teams of many, teams of 3, but sometimes we're also in teams of 1. So there's other things that we can do that if we were wanting to do something like a really low fidelity prototype of a voice interface, there's some tools there that are kind of online and scripty ones. So they're not audible, they're not, but they're visual, and you can basically use them as scripting tools. I've used Inkle quite a lot because it does a kind of progressive disclosure kind of pattern, and it's been great. And it's also it is a kind of choose your own adventure kind of game tool. So you've got that kind of routing and options that you can build into it. And particularly with Inkle, you get the code out as a JSON file at the end if you really want to, so you could then start wiring it into something more structured. Sorry. They can be. Yeah, no, we'll be good and put it up. I don't think we did last time. Another option, if you're wanting to then share your findings back to your team or your stakeholders or your client, is to build a fake bot. So if you want to do it in a really lo-fi way that's not very technical and you don't need to know any code, there's a great app called Bot Society, and it is basically a visualization of your script. And again, you've got options for branching the journey and showing different routes through there. And lastly, if you can't afford the technology, don't worry, there's emulators out there. So Echoism is actually published by Amazon, and it allows you to see the behavior of a kind of Amazon Alexa on screen. So you can type into it or talk to it if you've got a device that will hear you. And you don't have to have the hardware in front of you. And it's pretty much just like almost like a mobile emulator that we would use when we were doing mobile apps. And you can't talk about these things without having that scene from Star Trek in it. It's fantastic. But yeah, has anyone got any questions? Hey, yeah.
So when you're setting up these devices, so you know, Alexas and Google Home and so forth, for people who might not know that they're using the internet, how do you kind of navigate around privacy and, you know, essentially Google or Amazon having some of that data? Yeah.
So in my family's case, Mr. Never Have, Never Will, we explained to him that we could see everything that he was asking, so we could help him out of a sticky. So if he got himself into a bit of a hole, we had the transcript available to us on a tablet in our house, and we could look it up and we could help him fix it. And we kind of broached it from that perspective. And I understand there's wider ramifications, and he doesn't have, he would never put his card details anywhere near it. We know that, so that wasn't something that we had to cross. But we basically said, you know, we're not going to spy on you, but at any point, if you need our help and you want us to go back and check what you said, we can do that. And he was okay with that. Any other questions?
So what you know usually from these IVPs, was that the, yeah, IVAs, is that either you just have to guess what the options are and you speak, or they are read to you. So it's a linear interface, a voice-controlled interface. So you usually takes time, or you have to just try out. So is there any way that you see in the future that this kind of makes it transparent what options are actually available while sticking in the interface of the audio? Yeah.
So we use some of the tools I mentioned on the slides before to visualize the different flows and the different options and almost the kind of routing options that you have. I've done some specifications for IVR systems before, and they're like giant phone books of kind of routes. I actually found what the biggest word and number of pages you could have in a Word document was through one of those things. We had to split it up into two. We, again, for my father-in-law, had to give him a printout of basic commands so that he could have it handy. He has a tendency to bin things because he's a tidy kind of gent. So we've laminated it and stuck it to the side of the cabinet so that no one else can see. But he needed that just to get going.
Are we at risk? Are we at risk of going backwards to a certain extent? Because we started out with this terminal, and you typed it, and you were required to remember all those commands. Develop menu systems, because then you're not required to remember all those commands. And now we're going where you've got a system where you've got to speak all the commands, which you've got to remember.
So the best case scenario for me is the technology is adaptive to you, and it learns a bit about what your language and your vernacular is and stuff like that. So I heard you guys talking about the coming Friday or whatever, and you know it didn't understand it because it's quite a kind of localized way of saying it. But the idea being that the technology will be able to embrace you and adapt to your kind of speech. It depends. I understand what you're talking about, regression, but particularly in the case of my family, there's no way that they would have even got in front of a terminal. So there's kind of a win for them there. Hey, join them.
So I don't know about anyone else's task, but we were thinking about a confused elderly person trying to set a reminder. And so we had a bit of script here, but we thought, well, what happens if she just kind of goes, did I ever tell you about my Michael? He died in the war. But I do like baked beans. It might be time for toast. And just wondering what do you do when there's just so many options?
And just on that, it reinforced for me this exercise that it's no good testing things amongst yourselves, because all our customers were, intelligent, coherent people, and you need either extremely good actors, or genuinely, the user group. And just on that thing about the pull-down menus reminding us, we're still with voice, I think, at the stage before we knew that those pull-down menus contained the answers to what we wanted to, we're still fishing around in the beginnings. And just one other thing, when you're doing those branching menu things on a voice thing, for an elderly person, you can only give them 2 options. By the time you got to the 3rd option, they've forgotten the first one. So you've got to construct your tree just out of double branches all the way.
Are. So within terms of actually conducting this methodology, then you would have your customer as your target user, rather than somebody that's interested in UX or practicing UX. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no, yeah.
So it really
exactly.
is just that first pass. It's almost like the equivalent of a paper prototype, and you're just getting your pens out and sketching. It's just a little bit structured.
I wouldn't be me having announced Accessibility Scotland, just reminding everybody, if I didn't kind of flag up my personal concern. Technologies like this do actually, as they currently stand, actively exclude parts of our population. Because if you can't hear it, you're stuck. And if your communication skills aren't up to being recognized, regardless of how good the AI is, you're stuck. And those audiences, there's always a risk. How do we make sure we're engaging and embracing the thing?
So it's not to be exclusive, absolutely. It's to almost invite an audience who wouldn't have used the screen-based version on. And that's where I was coming at it from. So me and Mark, who you know well, we had a decent debate about whether or not this was actually an assistive technology or not. Because I felt for some people it absolutely was. And he kind of was more close to the real assistive technologies and voice recognition and how considerably more reliable they are, and he was like, I don't know. But there's certain people that are intimidated by the screen-based. So the next version of the Alexa has a screen, and I think that's a real disappointment in some respects, because they've moved away from the fact that you really don't actually need it necessarily. But it can do other things cheaply. So I understand that to get things fitted that flash can be quite costly and quite expensive, but what you can do is hook your Alexa up to your doorbell that's hooked up to your lights, and if you're pretty hard of hearing, which a lot of the elderly are, you've got this kind of full communication circle going where, without having to buy really, really specialised technology, you've got the Hive doorbell and you've got a flashing light to say there's somebody at the door. And it's maybe just an entry for some people, and I hear you though, it's not for everyone, absolutely. Yep. Absolutely, yeah. It's only a bit of it. So we're seeing Mr. Never Have, Never Will, the fact that we've got the internet in his house now, because the Alexa and we got them BT Sports, and we needed internet for that, and that was the deal for him. That was like, yay. But we can now get cameras when we need cameras, and we can now get sensors to recognise when he's turn the kettle on and off every morning because that's his routine and stuff. And if these routines start to break, then we've got wee earlier flags because we're not located especially close that we can just call in every day. And you know, we're kind of preparing for some of these things in future. But he wouldn't even hold a tablet before this. Still won't because he doesn't make the connection that it's the same thing. But he oh, I don't know what I'm doing, and gives you back. So we've almost removed the barrier for him, but I totally hands up, it's not the answer for everything. Cool. Oh. Or star. I'm finding hash or star usually gets you at someone fairly quickly. Yep.
Well, they do it as a cost-saving exercise to get you to the right department, but if they... So from their end it's a win, but from the customer's end you've potentially got a loss because you have to play guess the department or remember the 10 options if it's the option 1 through 10. So our organisations applying these things win for the wrong motives. Well, the right thing,
So surely from their usability testing, you would really hope that that's exposed some of that frustration, and they would have to be pretty arrogant to proceed with it if you know it was testing that badly always. But organisations can be.
Do people listen to the UX testers?
They at least nod.
Very much depends on the organisation.
Not always.
Also, they get paid too, so the organisation must have had a business case for hiring the UX tester.
That doesn't mean they're going to listen.
They've already decided, then you've got some cost fallacy, you've already spent X thousand pounds on this, we're going to go through it anyway. They're in management problems.
Absolutely. So my big beef with the technology we've been talking about is for some kind of legalistic reason they won't allow you to send an emergency message over these devices. And it's because I think the risk of having the equivalent of a 999 pattern going wrong would leave them open to lots of suing and lots of cases. But it makes so much sense. If you've got these people that they can just message a relative, just you know have a word that they can say, you know, call my son, whatever. That's a no-brainer for me, and I'm really frustrated at the fact that they've let their kind of legalese step in and stop this actually being really truly helpful to a group of people. It might come. But FaceTime.
Not that one.
Yeah.
No, there's too many risk factors, so you want to limit, because there are too many points where that sort of service could break. You want to limit it and control, particularly for emergency vulnerability.
But if you don't position it as an emergency particularly, you just have the communication capability to a relative.
Oh, that's fine, it'll let you phone a problem.
Yeah.
But it can do that.
Or like help. Help could be the trigger word for phoning, but that could be configurable by us, right? That doesn't necessarily. No, I hear you, but there's a sweet spot in there that we can get this.
There was a case where there was a domestic violence case in the US where someone shouted. The guy holding the gun was just like, "Did you call the police?" And Alexa actually called the police.
Wow.
And rocked up and.
Because there's a different one, I think, where they're trying to get the transcript of Alexa from Amazon, and Amazon won't give it to them. It's a bit like the whole issue with the smartphone, you know, but they won't give them the information.
Is that the one with the murder case?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so like someone got murdered, but the interesting thing, yeah, it was recorded, and they won't give them the transcript. But the interesting thing was, did you hear about the smart water meter usage? That there was a load of water being logged by the smart meter between 1 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and the lawyers were arguing that's them washing the blood away in the murder. Wow, that was interesting. But I thought the calling the police thing was really interesting.
It's not in the UK. It might be in the States, but certainly we've tried to find a skill. There won't be any, there's nothing in the UK right now. To the pub? Yep. Thank you very much.
interesting. And if anyone wants to, I don't know if you're going to be, will you be joining us for a drink? Perfect. So if anyone wants to join the, continue the discussions in a more, informal and relaxed venue, well, not that this isn't, of course, but with pint in hand, then come join us. We'll go to the Blue Blazer, I think, as usual, which is...
100 metres.
Yes, out here, left, and then it's on the corner on the left-hand side, right? Brilliant. Thank you again. Cheers, guys.